So welcome to Council of Geeks. My name is Nathaniel Wayne, and I'm joined tonight by Paul Scavito and Ryan Daly. And we are going to kind of autopsy and give a post-mortem on Fantastic Four, see what can be possibly salvaged out of this thing. Here we go.
Has anyone in this room seen the movie?
No!
Which
God,
movie?
no.
Fantastic Four.
Why?
Exactly. Yes, we should. In the interest of full disclosure, none of us have seen the movie.
No.
None of us are planning to see the movie. Mostly, we're actually going to be focusing on what happens now, as opposed to taking an in-depth look at the movie itself. Box office is in. It was the major release of the weekend. It took second place with a domestic total of just over 26 million.
Which, for the record, is about half of what they were projecting. I am giddy right now. I am so happy to hear the box office numbers. I am happy to hear that internationally, because a movie like Transformers, whatever the fourth one was, Age of
Extinction.
Yeah. That movie did the worst of any of the Transformers movies domestically.
Right.
But
it still made $1 billion in China.
Right.
So that franchise isn't in danger.
Right.
But overseas, this opening weekend, Fantastic Four just did marginally better than it did domestically. It's still only making about $60 million in total. Now, for perspective, I think the last comic book movie, maybe the last movie based on a Marvel property to do this bad, was Ghost Rider Spirits of Vengeance. But from everything that has been reported lately, like Fox stalled out and wouldn't let Josh Trank cast until the last minute. They kept on holding out and like signing contracts with their cast. Now they eventually gave him the cast that he wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like these were the actors that he wanted, but they waited until the last minute, so he couldn't prep. That slowed down everything. Supposedly they cut 3 major set pieces from this movie days before it was supposed to start shooting. And that's another thing, because people are talking about, for Fantastic Four superhero action movie, there's hardly any action in this movie. There are action scenes from the trailers that are not in this movie.
That was one of the major things that from the reviews that I read is that it's basically an hour build up.
Yeah.
Any other superhero movie, you build up with an action beat here, and here. Those are gone.
Right.
So it's just a very slow build up to a climax that nobody cares about. From everything that I've heard, we don't have to put our aging comic book angry nerd hats on to pull this apart. We don't have to pick on the fact that it's different from the source material. On its face, by every account, it's just a bad movie. No, objectively.
I talked to a friend on Facebook who's never read the comic, didn't even know the names of the Fantastic Four characters. And she said this was the worst movie she's seen in 2 years.
I mean, here it is. Here is the third film coming out for this franchise that doesn't connect with fans, doesn't connect with critics, doesn't seem to connect with anybody, and it's a second interpretation of this property, right? And so if they can't get it right twice, theoretically on these two different concepts,
third time if we're technical, but we're not going to bring up the Roger Corman 90s thing. We're just
ironically, as bad as this, is still the most true to the source material.
Yes, that could be a whole separate conversation.
I think Fantastic Four is more difficult than some because the spirit of those characters and the spirit of the story is very, very entrenched in the 1960s and that particular realm of science fiction. But you know what? So is Star Trek.
Anybody trying to make a Fantastic Four movie is now fighting the stigma of 3 theatrically released, mediocre to bad Fantastic Four movies, in addition to having to try and sell a premise that is not current anymore. Now, if you want to make the comparison to, say, Batman and Robin, Batman Begins had to overcome that.
Sure.
But it had at least that first Batman movie that said, look, it was good once. It can be good again. We've had 3 strikes.
Because I've heard a few other people throwing out suggestions for possible corrections. And one thing that I had heard, which I've heard before, is should that be a period piece? They tried it with X-Men Days of Future Past too,
First
but
Class,
also First Class. It's like, should they treat this as Mad Men with the superhero genre? Could you do? I think that would work, but I think that is also a conceit that it doesn't work in the modern context, which I don't like making that concession.
Yeah.
Somebody else suggested that because of the weird serial storytelling, should Fantastic Four be a television show? Would it have a greater legs there than it does in film? My answer to that is it would need Game of Thrones type of budget.
Yeah. I mean that's the
Fantastic Four doesn't work unless you're willing to go extremely far out into the realms of space, hyperspace, inner space, microspace, all of these things. It's got to be crazy big in scope.
I don't see us getting a Fantastic Four movie. Because let's remember, Fox has no merchandising rights with this.
Right.
They make money on the movie only.
Right.
So if the movie tanks and if the movie loses money, they don't actually have a lot of impetus to keep making it. Because I've seen some people be like, oh, they'll try again as a rights grab. Like, it's not worth their money because at this point they are now losing money on this property, and it makes no sense for them to keep the rights. So this kind of brings us to, well, what happens now?
So what I see happening from this is that Fox is going to move fast. I think they're going to stop talking about this movie pretty quickly.
They already have.
Right. And they're going to move directly into, or they're already on to Deadpool, and they're going to start talking about the X-Men thing that's going to be coming next. Well, and I think in the background, they're going to let it go.
So Fox had already greenlit and booked and scheduled a sequel to Fantastic Four. It's supposed to come out in 2017.
Oh my gosh.
Saturday morning, the movie sort of opened up on Thursday nights in select screenings, but mass audience was Friday. Yep. On Saturday morning, there were rumors coming out that they're already swapping a Deadpool sequel for that same date in 2017 and just forgetting Fantastic Four. I don't think we're going to get a sequel to this.
Oh, no.
The one potential lifeline that this property might have at Fox is if they wanted to do an X-Men Fantastic Four crossover, which a week ago I was saying, you know what, they're going to blame this movie's failure on Josh Trank and let that be it, but they're going to say the characters itself are fine, people want to see these characters in a better movie. And the X-Men, the mutant franchise, can just be a shot of adrenaline to keep this property's heart beating, and we'll just tie those together. Now, I think
Simon Kinberg even said flat out, these are separate universes. They will not cross over.
Now they're thinking that this is dead weight that could pull X-Men underwater.
Its sequel is very unlikely.
Yes.
Another reboot
from Fox.
From Fox.
Like, what kind of timeline are we talking about? Within 3 or 5 years?
Well, I think their ticking clock with Marvel is 7, because that was how long it took for the rights to Daredevil to revert.
I would say that the odds of that are higher.
Within that time period, we are going to get a lot of comic book based movies because Warner Brothers is finally getting in the game, and Warner Brothers is going to start cranking out 2 or even 3 pictures a year. Marvel is going to be doing 2 or 3 pictures a year. We keep wondering if the comic book movie balloon is going to burst. Ant-Man is the only comic book movie of the 3 this summer that didn't underperform based on what the studio expected. Age of Ultron technically made $1.5 billion, but it underperformed based on what Disney was expecting. Fantastic Four face planted, I should say. If we start noticing a trend where these movies become less popular and they're also really crowded, and Star Wars and these other franchises start picking up momentum, Fox might just say there isn't a market for this anymore. And even if they wanted to do a reboot in 2020, it'll depend on how the new Spider-Man does. Because the new Spider-Man will have been the 3rd reboot in a little bit over a decade.
Yeah.
And if they're able to pull that off, then they might just say, we'll just pretend this didn't happen.
Third time's the charm.
Right.
Okay. I would say more likely than a sequel.
Yep.
Still not particularly likely. And I'm going to bring that down just to the accountants and to the math. Because somebody at a high level is just going to look at the numbers of this last thing and going, look, we spent $120 million, which is a modestly budgeted,
very modestly budgeted
comic book superhero movie, and we still lost money. They could just let the rights lapse.
So I don't think that will happen, because even though I don't anticipate Marvel would act on the property for a long time, I think if Fox decides that they're not going to make another movie with this property, and I think they're making that decision soon, I don't think they would just let it lapse after 6 years. I think they're like, we can sell this back. Fox has been wanting to do an X-Men TV show for a long time. And I would argue that there already has been. It was the first season of Heroes, like a decade ago. They really want to do that. Now, because it's a different media, Marvel needs to sign off on that.
Because all they have is film rights.
Right.
Correct.
Now, if Marvel will make money from it, they'll do it. But this creates an interesting kind of bartering situation where Fantastic Four could be used as leverage to grease the skids for that. So Fox could say, we want an X-Men TV show. We'll give you Fantastic Four if you don't object.
Let's just talk about TV. Here's my question, is what currently successful science fiction shows of the past decade can you think of?
Battlestar Galactica.
Doctor Who or some of that spin-offs?
So these are two very successful science fiction properties that have that worked very, very well and made a lot of money. Now, if we look at Battlestar Galactica had an enormous budget. The production value was very high. Had a very loyal following. It was critically acclaimed, and they pulled off some big stuff. There was Star Wars level stuff going on in the modern version of Battlestar Galactica. I mean, if you look at the effects that were going on, the CG effects that they were doing, it's pretty complicated stuff, right? And so then I'm just going to slide over to Doctor Who. Right? Now, Doctor Who, I'm using as a reference point only because Doctor Who has that sense of wonder and awe in it, right? The effects are not very good. The show is cheap.
No, yeah, the show
but
is
tonally, it is in the right place, and they are doing a lot of stuff in Doctor Who where they're telling stories about science fiction stuff and science fiction sort of ideas and theories without doing it in these enormously expensive Firefly-esque sort of budget spending.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong about Battlestar Galactica. My memory of that, and in regards to budget, is that the outer space and CG stuff was good and was of high caliber, but happened very infrequently. Like, there would be 2 or 3 episode stretches of basically people on the interior sets of that ship just talking. So while, yes, there was spectacle and it was high level, almost cinema ready spectacle, they didn't even have it every episode. And then in regards to Doctor Who, part of the reason Doctor Who gets away with the effects not looking as good as other standards are is it has a history of that. That was kind of the charm of Doctor Who going back to the 60s. So it kind of gets a pass on that basis. I think an American audience, which is who this is going to be for, does not accept camp as a thing. And Fantastic Four, specifically in regards to their powers, it's so intrinsic to what they do. And again, like we said, they're not superheroes, they are explorers, but they're explorers who can do incredible things. And those things are so fundamental to who they are that if they're in situations where they're not using those powers because the budget doesn't allow them to do it every episode, you're going to be sitting there going, well, why the hell isn't he just turning into fire?
The thing is, though, is that I think if Fantastic Four is going to have a life, right, I think it is going to be TV. I think the property lends itself to that type of storytelling, for one. And I also think that somebody like Netflix, right, can, if they show up with the other half of the budget, but Sense8, right, which is on Netflix right now, and I'm not saying these properties are the same, is a very expensive show, right, with very high production values. They're shooting in 8 different locations around the world, right? They're spending a ton of money. Just got renewed for a second season. And if someone like Netflix can show up to produce a show of that kind of caliber, I think they can do the same thing with something like Fantastic Four without having to go to HBO or Showtime.
You talked me into thinking about this a little bit differently, because in my dream scenario, we would get 4 or 5 Fantastic Four movies in quick succession, because there are so many great stories that are so different from each other. Like they lock themselves into Doctor Doom because he's the most famous, but there are so many elements from the first 50 issues of those comics that you could go to that are just larger than life and just fantastic. If we could get a more serialized, if we could get a TV version, like a series that had a real significant budget, I would love if they would do it.
I'll make the comparison to Doctor Who, because I think if you're going to make it a TV show, it should have that same target. It should be like every member of the family can sit down and enjoy this. But the kinds of networks that are spending the money that you would need to make the effects work don't cater to that audience.
We might see a change with Supergirl.
Maybe they'll just make a bunch of really cool commercials. It's like 45 seconds, high budget.
we need to absolutely scrap Origin, not just because people are sick of origin stories, but I think functionally the Fantastic Four work best as an established thing in the world, not something that the government is questioning and wondering, can we trust these? Like, they're here, we trust them, these are the people we go to. And I think we need to jump ahead to that point.
If you need to explain it, you do it somewhere in Act 2 and it's a 10-minute flashback.
Yeah. I have nowhere else to put this talk, but I just kind of got to throw it out there. How do they keep screwing up Doctor Doom? He is a combination of the most classic villain aspects ever. He's a dictator, he's a mad scientist, he has a suit of armor, and sometimes he does magic. You have to try to screw that up.
He's hokey.
I think the combination of
but so are the Fantastic Four.
The combination of all of those things scares them. The fact that he's a master of crazy robot science and magic, that's a tough sell for...
Fine, drop the magic, but they keep dropping the fact that he's a dictator. And
the fact that he looks like a robot and talks like Dracula. These are... No, I love the character, and I think there are ways of doing him right. You need to exercise a little bit of patience, and you need to assume your audience is not stupid. And I think a lot of studios do. Yeah. Because people see stupid movies.
Yes.
Not this one.
Yep.
No. Sometimes they skip stupid movies, but
for some reason
they're still going to see Transformers. So you know what the hell do we know? You know what? I mean, ultimately, here's the thing, and here's kind of why I wish Marvel had the rights back. I don't necessarily need to see the Fantastic Four on screen. I do want Doom in the MCU though. And I've said this before, that the Marvel movies they're starting to trip over their feet on villains in general, and they're getting very generic. And I would love them to have a everybody rally around. Here's a big standard villain who we can't just swoop in and take out. And I think Doom ruling Latveria with an iron fist, with diplomatic immunity, who they can't just go in and dismantle his government, would be awesome.
Back to a conversation I wasn't actually a part of. So, Ant-Man. One of my thoughts after coming out of Ant-Man was that and I think we had agreed on this, was that I didn't ever need to see another Ant-Man movie.
No. I'll be very happy to see him turn up in Civil War and anywhere else they want to use him, but no, he doesn't need another solo movie.
So, with that kind of thread, and I'm not saying you can't make a Fantastic Four movie, because I think you can, but maybe it's not, and this is the nuance to this argument, necessary in order for those characters to exist within the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
They could show up in like an Infinity War thing. They would actually be terrific supporting characters in a later Spider-Man movie.
I think they would fit into Infinity War really well, both in terms of the story and in terms of being an introduction point. Because if it's like, there are invaders coming from space, we need a science spacey guy. I know this guy. Here's Reed Richards just shows up because they called the science spacey guy that they needed.
It's who's the smartest guy inside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, inside the Marvel Universe, right?
And even though I would want them to be part of the shared universe, I mean, Doctor Strange is going to open up parallel dimensions and other things. So with the Infinity Stones and everything, they could show up coming out of a portal from another dimension and just say, we're not from your same world. We're from a different Earth where we are the only Earth.
I'd rather they didn't.
That's
the first step to introducing the Marvel Zombies universe. So let's not go there.
Oh boy.
Robert Kirkman is big on Walking Dead right now.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a junior executive who is just a stack of Marvel Zombies on his desk, and he's just. Anyway,
I feel like we kind of wound down to a natural point there.
We didn't talk about Josh Trank's semi-public self-destruction, and
you know what? I think it's probably a 6 of one, half dozen of the other. He
did tweet the night before the movie came out, basically distancing himself from the movie.
Well, yeah, he tweeted and then deleted, but it doesn't matter because it's the internet. It's out there once. It's out there forever. That there was a much better version of this movie that existed a year ago. It's not what's being released.
Ensuring he won't get hired by Fox again.
Oh yeah,
and he was already fired from an upcoming Star Wars movie, so he's not going to work at Disney anymore.
Well, see, the thing is, I think his career I would be surprised if it ever recovers seriously after this, because
he'll make more movies, but it's not going to be.
Well, no, he'll never be granted this kind of budget, or it's going to be a very long time before he is. But I think
that's assuming he doesn't overdose and die, which I think.
Whose actual fault this is going to be very unclear for a long time. I think it's probably going to be a decade or more. People who were involved in the studio end of this need to no longer be at that studio before we're going to get a much clearer picture of what the heck actually happened.
There's a filmmaker named John Schnepp who just released a documentary called The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened, which is basically, it's all about what was going to be Tim Burton's Superman Lives movie with Nicolas Cage. And it's all about how, it's a very in-depth, from what I've heard, and I'm going to download at some point, I've heard it's a great movie, and he talks to everybody who was involved.
But the reason everyone was willing to talk is because it was 15 years ago.
Right, exactly. So I think a decade from now, we're going to get a great documentary about what happened to this Fantastic Four movie.
And that I will actually go to the theater and see. We'll wrap it up there. So I know you guys have your projects you want to plug. Paul, what you got going on?
So I'm working on a comic for Rising Sun Comics called Armadillo Justice. It's about a bunch of armadillos from space that fight ants. It's pretty much awesome. Not to mention Red and Green that Ryan and I are the writers of, which, is out there and funny.
Hilarious.
Oh my god. I was just reading the other day and I was like, ha, ha.
That's about it. Yeah, that's really the kind of laughter that we get from
that. That sounds about right. And Ryan?
I'm the host of a number of podcasts that you can find. Dead Boffin Spies, a Star Wars podcast. Flowers and Fishnets, a Black Canary podcast. And the Secret Origins podcast. All of which are available for download on iTunes. Check those out.
All right. And one other note for folks who are watching the video, we're doing something slightly different because whenever we shoot these, we end up with anywhere from 45 minutes to about an hour and a half worth of stuff that I then cut down to 10 to 20 minutes. But the point being, the video is always very truncated. So kind of as an initial experiment, we'll see if we stick with it. I'm actually going to release this entire conversation pretty much unedited as a podcast. It will be the Council of Geeks podcast, which will hopefully be available on iTunes. It will definitely be linked. There is a blogspot, councilofgeeks.blogspot.com, and also the Facebook page, Council of Geeks. I will link to that when it's available. So if you're interested in even more than what you got to see,
and who wouldn't be?
Yeah, why wouldn't you be? You can check that out, and I'll include a link in the description of this video. And so thank you guys very much for joining me, and until next time, this council is adjourned.
You're gonna cut out the racist part where we talked earlier. That's not gonna go in the final version.
Right. Oh, of course. Yes. I always.
That rant was dark. I don't know what's wrong with you.
Well, listen.